Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here for my Friday reads. I do have a couple of books on the go at the moment, and one that I did indeed finish this week. So one of the books I have on the go is J.M. Barrie's Better Dead, which I am reading aloud. I've posted the first 2 chapters with the 3rd chapter going up at 4 p.m. today. And this is J.M. Barrie's first novel from 1887 about a young man from Scotland who ends up moving to London and finding himself unemployed and wandering about and going a little bit crazy and stumbling across someone committing a murder. And it develops from there, and he discovers this secret society. So if you're interested in that, do click on those videos where I'm reading aloud. But then in addition to that, I'm also working on a novel from 1927 called Dusty Answer, and it's by author Rosamund Lehman. And this is one I had never heard of. I actually had a little bit of a difficult time getting my hands on a copy. I ended up ordering used online, and I got this library discard from some random library in the United States, I believe. But as I said, this is a novel from 1927, and it is, at least in my impression so far, it's a coming-of-age novel. So our main character is Judith. She is 18 when the novel opens, and she is living essentially alone in this rather large house. Her parents are off in Europe, and she has spent almost her entire childhood alone, with the exception of tutors, except for some summers in her childhood when the house next door was occupied by a group of cousins. So you have several boys, Martin, Roddy, Charlie, and Julian, as well as, let me just double check the girl's name here, Marielle, I'm thinking her name is. Yeah, Mariella. And so we find out within the first few pages that they have grown up. They have not spent summers at the house next door in several summers because their grandmother died. And so she really hasn't seen this group of childhood friends since they were children. But she has heard that Mariella and Charlie ended up getting married, which is a little bit odd, but I guess not unheard of for the time, since they were first cousins. So Mariella and Charles were first cousins. They got married. Mariella gave birth to one child, but Charles actually died in the war, so in the First World War. And so Judith, who is 18, hears that Mariella is coming back to take possession of the house. She is going to live there with her child, and so Judith is peeking through the hedges, hoping to catch a glimpse of these friends who meant so much to her in her childhood. And because they were really the only people her own age who she ever met, she has built them up into these mythical people. She has created sort of these grand romantic stories in her head. Not only romantic, like in the capital R sense, but also, you know, in the regular romantic sense. She is fantasizing about these young men. And even when they're reintroduced and they see her as an adult, she is in fact an adult, even though she's still wearing her hair down as a young girl would. When she is reintroduced to them as an adult, it's difficult to distinguish which of these young men she actually is attracted to, because she is still inventing these stories in her head. Is it Martin? Martin, who seems to adore her? Probably not. He seems to be sort of her I don't know. She is the one she goes, Martin is the one that she goes to when she can't get the attention of the others. We get the impression that she perhaps likes Julian. Julian is a bit of an intellectual. Then we get the impression that she is really into Roddy. Roddy, who only came for a week every summer when they were children. But there is a little bit of a problem here because we do get this scene where it is suggested that Roddy may in fact be gay because he has an adoring young friend. And so she's really most obsessed with Roddy and Julian, but Martin is the young man who actually seems to be interested in her. But although she'll pour her heart out to him when no one else is available, she's not really interested in him. And so I'm at the point in the novel where she has gone off to college, to university, to Oxford. And she is rooming with a girl by the name of Jennifer, who she is quite enamored with. They sort of locked eyes across a crowded room, and there was some sort of attraction there. I'm not sure whether it's going to turn into a romantic attraction or whether it's just a romantic friendship, but they locked eyes across the room, knew they had to meet, and became inseparable. But Martin is also at university here, and he is sort of tagging along, showing up to the afternoon teas that the ladies hold, and she's just essentially told Martin to get lost. And then Martin is asking, when's Roddy coming to see you? But if that one scene we got earlier in the novel is correct, Roddy isn't ever coming to see her because Roddy isn't actually interested in her. And I'm quite enjoying the writing. There is one scene that made me cringe a bit because shortly after she arrives at Oxford, she meets another young woman who seems perfectly nice. Her name is Mabel, and Mabel invites Judith back to her room, makes her a nice cup of hot cocoa, says some things like, "Isn't hot cocoa just so nourishing?" She gives her some nice treats, but Judith views her as someone to look at with disgust, someone to laugh about, and her and Jennifer later have a laugh about how vile and how disgusting this girl is, which I was quite shocked at this scene because I thought she seemed like quite a nice girl, but apparently not. And then we do have some quite nice writing here, and so this is October after she first goes to college. The weeks drifted on. College became a pleasant habit. Lecturers ceased to be oracles. Work ceased to be important. Young men stared in lecture rooms and streets. There grew the consciousness of fundamental masculine apartness, of the other sex mysteriously calling to and avoiding it across an impassable gulf. Bookshops became places in which to wander and browse whole mornings. Towards the town, back from the town, the long road stretched out daily between the flat, ploughed fields. The immense and crushing arc of the sky was swept forever with rich changes. And the buildings, the fall of sunlight and shadows on grey stone, red stone, the unblurred design of roofs and walls at dusk, the buildings lifted their bulk, unfolded, their pattern glowed upon the mind, by day and by night, breaking in upon essays, disturbing time papers. Jennifer's shining head, curved cheek, lifted white throat lay against the blue curtain, just beyond the lamplight. Very late she sat there and said nothing, did nothing. Made you lift eyes from the page, watch her, dream, wait for her to smile to answer yours. The garden, the river, the children next door were far away. Sometimes you listened, there was nothing to be heard, not even Roddy. Sometimes the bird calls, the wet green scatters of buds, the flowering cherry tree. Sometimes the sunny, mown lawn in stripes, the red rambler clouds heavy on the hot wall. Sometimes the mist, the bloom on the clouds, the fallen yellow leaves in the dew. Sometimes the rooks rocking in the blown treetop, the strong, dark, bewildering pattern of bare branches swirling across the sky. The tragic light crying out for a moment at sunset, haggard through torn clouds, then drowned again. Sometimes these moved in their seasons through the garden so faintly behind your shut eyes, they stirred no pain. Sometimes a silent group, waiting in the darkness by the river, had vanished as if they had been childish things put away. Time flowed imperceptibly, casting up trifles here and there upon its banks. And so that is I don't know, a beautiful summary of her first fall at school at Cambridge, and it's Cambridge. I think for some reason I said Oxford, which I know is wrong, but her first fall at Cambridge. And I'm quite looking forward to seeing what happens next year and how she comes into contact with the children from next door again. So that is one I'm reading, and I do believe there is a more recent paperback issue of this. I just wasn't able to find it when I was ordering my copy. So then I did read this past week in its entirety Byways Among English Books by Cyril Davenport. And so this is just a little book about books. My dust jacket is still intact, but I went and I put a little tear in it when I was reading by accident. And I really shouldn't have done that because I took it off to read, and it was when I was returning it to the book that I put the tear in it. So this is a book from 1927, and we have sections on collectors and collecting, printing and engraving, on bindings, on illustrated books, and on miniature books. And I quite enjoyed the section on binding. I've read a couple of other books on the same subject in the past, but they haven't been English specific. So this was quite interesting to get a little snapshot of English binding and to read about unique bindings that we certainly don't do anymore in, velvet, silk, satin, canvas, and cloth. We're not embedding jewels or anything into our books. I didn't enjoy the section on miniature books quite as much, just because I'm not all that interested in miniature books. But yeah, it was a nice little overview, and there are some great illustrations throughout. And the author is of the opinion that there is very little that emerged originally in English binding. Most things were adapted or borrowed from Italian and French binding, with the exception of a few small things that emerged over the years. And I found the discussion of silk bindings quite interesting. Silk bindings are not durable at all, so very few of them have survived, but they were often used to bind books for ladies, so to make a book almost an accessory, so perhaps a prayer book bound in silk that you could carry to church along with whatever dress you were wearing that day. But silk frays over time and doesn't wear nicely, and so those weren't very durable. And then I just want to talk about one book that I'm planning to read in the next few days. And this is something I picked up in a little free library Tuesday night. And this is something called Canada's Treasure Hunt by Alex Storm, as told by Brian Shaw. Little tiny paperback here. How a fortune in gold and silver coins lost off the coast of Nova Scotia in 1725 was hunted and found by 3 young Canadians in 1965. And I read the introduction so far, and I found it quite interesting, and so I'm going to read you the introduction as well. So early in July of 1725, during the reign of King Louis, I'm not sure what that Roman numeral is, one of the King Louis of France, a ship set sail from the French port of Roquefort bound for Quebec, quite unaware that she was destined to become the most controversial treasure ship of the 20th century. Her name was Le Chameau, the camel. Le Chameau was a flute of the King's Navy, weighing 600 tons. She was well armed and carried a complement of 100 officers and men under the command of Lieutenant Jean-Charles Perchon de St. James. On this particular journey, she was also carrying a further 216 passengers, among whom were 5 important dignitaries of France: M. de Chalez, the newly appointed Intendant of Canada; M. de Louvigny, the governor of Trois-Rivières; M. de Lagnes, son of the governor of Montreal; the commanders of the French infantry and artillery in Canada. And there were also several high-ranking church officials on board. Perhaps the most valuable cargo of all, however, was the money she carried on board to pay the troops in Quebec. According to the historical records in the National Archives of France, the total amount carried was 82,000 10 livres in gold and silver coins of the royal treasury. So that amounts to what would have been about $2 million today. So $2 million in 1967 when this was published. Le Chameau had been at sea for 6 weeks when one fatal night, August 25th, 1725, she was caught in a blistering east-southeast gale off the coast of Cape Breton near the Bay of Louisbourg. For almost 5 hours she fought the fury of the sea until at 20 minutes to 4 in the morning on August 26th, about 4,000 feet offshore, she was tossed like a helpless child onto the southeasterly side of what is now called Chameau Reef. The first impact tore her bow apart, sent cannons flying overboard, and spars crashing to her decks. The damage from the first blow was inconceivable. She slid along the east side of the rock onto the jagged reef. Within minutes, she was ripped apart by the crushing force of the waves and scattered in all directions, sinking within 50 feet of the rock. Not a living soul survived those short, horrifying moments as Le Chameau met her death at the hands of a merciless sea. Of all the persons on board, only 180 bodies were washed ashore. Most of them were badly mutilated and undressed, which gives some indication of the suddenness of the disaster. The town of Louisbourg was the nearest large community to the wreck and the seat of French government on the Atlantic coast. Today, 241 years later, Louisbourg has become a place of historical significance to Canada. At this moment, the Canadian government has undertaken a massive and adventurous restoration project, the rebuilding of the fortress of Louisbourg as it stood centuries ago. Ironically, right smack in the center of the activity again is Le Chameau, which, during all these long years, and despite the frenzied efforts of many diving expeditions, had refused to give up the valuable treasure that she took to the bottom of the sea. Then, on September 19th, 1965, she laid open the king's ransom entrusted to her care and surrendered it to 3 young Canadians drawn together by their own personal dreams and desires to strike it rich. This is their story. So this sounds quite exciting, a little treasure hunt. I had never heard of this ship or of the treasure. There's some nice black and white pictures in here, but they have fallen out of the book, so they're just sitting loose in here. I don't want to lose those. I don't know what order they go in because they're not numbered. But yeah, here we've got It's Gold, Alex with a Barrel Full. So you can see they found quite the treasure, and I'm excited to read through this and discover exactly how they discovered it. So that's what I've been reading, what I intend to continue reading over the next few days. I did want to mention one more thing here. So on Wednesday, I did sit in on a interview that Simon & Schuster did with Peter Mansbridge. Now, if you're Canadian, you of course know that Peter Mansbridge is a extremely well-known Canadian news personality and journalist who has since retired. He was the host of CBC's The National for many years. But he is coming out with a book this fall, and it's actually a little bit puzzling to me how I ended up on Simon & Schuster's mailing list. I think I may have tried to sign up at some point, but regardless, they sent me an invitation to this interview, Zoom WebEx interview with Peter Mansbridge on Wednesday. And so I logged on to listen, and I'm quite intrigued because I didn't know he was coming out with a book, and it's called Extraordinary Canadians, and it is nonfiction. It is a piece of journalism, but it sounds as though he's done it in a little bit of a unique way, in that the stories in the book are written in first person. So he's written these stories as though it's the voice of the people he interviewed, which sounds quite interesting. And he described these stories as ordinary yet extraordinary people. So these are not politicians or people that are widely publicly known. These are, quote, everyday Canadians who have some sort of extraordinary story to tell. people who perhaps have never been interviewed before. And so I'm quite excited to see what this book is all about come fall. It is out in November, I believe. So perhaps I'll purchase myself a copy of that and talk about it here on my channel. Peter Mansbridge is probably the most well-known person in Canadian news, and definitely my favorite. It still feels strange to have, since he retired, to have an election night coverage on CBC without Peter Mansbridge, to watch Canada Day coverage without Peter Mansbridge. It just feels a little bit odd at this point, but his retirement is well deserved, and obviously he's got new and exciting projects on the go. So that is what I'm up to this Friday, and moving into August, and I've got vacation next week, so probably expect a few videos from me next week as I spend some time just enjoying myself and enjoying the weather here in Ottawa.